tributes to be paid. Right. Order. Whip to report.
I beg to report that the committee has gone through the bill and directed me to report the same without amendment to the House.
Third reading. Minister.
Now.
No. There we are. Minister to move the third reading. Right. Okay. Minister.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, of course, echo the tribute to Sir Tony.
Just let the room just clear. Yeah. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I, of course, echo the tribute to Sir Tony. And I beg to move that the bill be now read a third time. The Prime Minister, the Government, I have been clear that we will do whatever it takes to stop the boats. And we have, of course, been making progress on that pledge, reducing small boat arrivals by over a third last year. But to stop the boats completely, to stop them for good, we need to deter people from making these dangerous journeys, from risking their lives and from lining the pockets of evil, criminal people smuggling gangs. The new legally binding treaty with the government of the Republic of Rwanda responds directly to the Supreme Court's concerns, reflecting the strength of the government of Rwanda's protections and commitments. This bill sends an unambiguously clear message that if you enter the United Kingdom illegally, you cannot stay. This bill has been meticulously drafted to end the merry-go-round of legal challenges. People will not be able to use our asylum laws, human rights laws, or judicial reviews to block their legitimate removal. And the default will be for claims to be heard outside of this country. Only a very small number of migrants who face a real and imminent risk of serious and irreversible harm will be able to appeal decisions in the UK. And if... I will give way.
Grateful, Mr. Speaker, to the Home Secretary. As things stand, can the Home Secretary confirm that if this bill receives royal assent, that it will not breach international law? Yes or no?
My right honourable friend raises an important point and gives me an opportunity to be unambiguous and clear. As drafted, as we intend this bill to progress, it will be in complete compliance with international law. The UK takes international law seriously, and the countries that we choose to partner with internationally also take international law seriously. Because under our I will, and then I will make progress. Yeah.
The intervention just now was extremely apposite. Could the Foreign Secretary be kind enough to give me the advice as to why he said what he just said about no breaches of international law?
My honourable friend will know. My honourable friend will know that the government does not make its legal advice public. We have put forward, of course, an explanation of our position, but I am absolutely confident that we will maintain our long-standing tradition of being a country that not just abides by international law, but champions and defends international law. Under our new legislation, migrants will not be able to frustrate the decision to remove them to Rwanda by bringing systemic challenges about the general safety of Rwanda. I will.
I'm grateful to the Home Secretary, Mr. Speaker, but could you give us assurance that if this bill is passed tonight, there will be a system in place that will accurately test its success month by month, week by week, so that we know all this anger, all this frustration, all this work is not for nothing?
Mr. Speaker, I think honourable gentleman speaks certainly for a number of people in the House, maybe not too many people on his own benches, because it certainly sounds as if he wants this to work. And I know there are plenty of people across the other side of the House who have tried to frustrate our attempts to deal with illegal migration. But we will, of course, want to assess the success, because we want to be proud of the fact that this government, unlike the parties opposite, actually cares about strengthening our borders and defending ourselves against those evil people smugglers and their evil trade. I want to make it clear that we will disapply the avenues used by individuals that blocked the first flight to Rwanda, including asylum and human rights claims, because without that very, very narrow route to individual challenge, we would undermine the treaty that we have just signed with Rwanda and run the very serious risk of collapsing the scheme, and that must not be allowed to happen. But if people attempt to use this route simply as a delaying tactic, they will have their claim dismissed by the Home Office and they will be removed. The bill also ensures that it is for ministers and for ministers alone to decide whether to comply with the ECHR interim measures, because it is for the British people and the British people alone to decide who comes and who stays in this country. The Prime Minister said he would not have included that clause unless we were intending and prepared to use it, and that is very much the case. We will not let foreign courts prevent us from managing our own borders. And, as reiterated by the Cabinet Office today, it is a responsibility, as the established case, that civil servants under the Civil Service Code are there to deliver ministers of the Crown's decisions. Mr. Speaker, the bill is key to stopping the boat once and for all. And to reassure some of the people who have approached me with concerns, I would remind them that Albanians previously made up around a third of small boat arrivals, but through working intensively and closely with Albania and their government, more than 5,000 people with no right to be here have been returned. And the deterrent was powerful enough to drive down arrivals from Albania by over 90%. Strasbourg has not intervened, flights from Rwanda have not been stopped, and the House should understand that this legislation, once passed, will go even further and be even stronger than the legislation that underpins Albania.
We obviously support the Albania agreement, but will he confirm that only 5% of Albanians who've arrived in the country over the last few years on small boats have actually been returned or removed? What's happened to the other 95%?
As I said, this is about deterrence, and the deterrent effect is clear for anyone to see. Over 90% reduction in the number of Albanians who have arrived in these shores because of the deterrent effect. And I'm glad that she chose this point to intervene, because it reminds me, of course, that the Labour Party have, of course, no credible plans at all to manage our borders. They have tried to obstruct our plans to tackle illegal migration over and over again, more than 80 times. They even want to cut a deal with the EU that would see us receive 100,000 extra illegal migrants each and every year, and they cheer. She's pleased with the idea that they're going to receive an extra 100,000 every year. They can laugh, but we take this issue seriously, because it is not what our country needs, and it is not what our constituents want. Mr. Speaker, we are united in the agreement that stopping the boats and getting Rwanda partnership up and running is of the utmost importance. And having a debate about how to get the policy right is, of course, what this House is for. That is our collective job, and I respect my good friends and colleagues on my side of the House for putting forward amendments in good faith in order to do what they believe will strengthen the bill. But, Mr. Speaker, whilst my party sits only a short physical distance from the parties opposite, the gulf between our aspiration to control our borders and their blasé, laissez-faire attitude to border control could not be more stark. Stopping the boats is not just a question of policy. It is a question of morality, and it is a question of fairness. And it is this government, this party, the Conservative Party, which is the only party in this House taking this issue as seriously as it should. I urge this House to stick with our plan and to stop the boats.
The question is that the bill now be read a third time. Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I first just add my tributes to Tony Lloyd, who did such wonderful work in policing as well as in this place. Mr. Speaker, what a farce today and yesterday have been. Just another day of Tory chaos and carnage. A Prime Minister with no grip, while the British taxpayer is continually forced to pay the price. Former Tory cabinet ministers, deputy chairs from all sides queuing up to tell us it's a bad bill, it won't work, it won't protect our borders, it won't comply with international law, it's fatally flawed. The only thing the Tories all seem to agree on is that the scheme is failing, the law won't solve it, and the Prime Minister is failing too, and they know it. A failing Rwanda scheme that's costing Britain £400 million, that sent more Home Secretaries than asylum seekers to Kigali, and that will only apply to less than 1% of those arriving in the UK. Less than 1%. The third Tory law on channel crossings in 2 years, it will get through tonight, just like the previous two did, even though they failed, just like the last two, a total con on the British people. And this chaos leaves the Prime Minister's authority in tatters. He's in office but not in power. No one agrees with him on his policy, and the real weakness is that he doesn't even agree with it himself. A Prime Minister who is so weak he's lost control of the asylum system, lost control of our borders, and lost any control of the Tory party. 60 Tory MPs voting against the government, 2 deputy chairs sacked, a Home Secretary and Immigration Secretary formally lost, Cabinet Ministers briefing openly they don't support the bill. The Home Secretary himself thinks it's batshit, the Prime Minister tried to cancel it, and yet, so weak, they're still going ahead. And under the Tories, we've seen border security weakened while criminal gangs take hold because they've not taken the action that we need. The backlog saw the budget bust. Criminal smuggler convictions have dropped by 30%. Returns have halved. And instead of the practical plans that Labour set out to set up the new Returns and Enforcement Unit, to stop the Home Office just losing thousands of people that it cannot keep track of, to stop the halving of the Returns Unit, to set up the new security powers to go after the criminal gangs, to stop this 30% drop in criminal gang smuggler convictions, and to have the additional cross-border police unit that we could be investing in if we weren't spending so much money on this failing Rwanda scheme. Because it's £400 million of taxpayers' money going to Rwanda, all without a single person being sent, all in addition to their whopping multi-billion-pound hotel bill. And of course, if they get flights off, it's probably another 10 to 20 million for every 100 people they actually manage to send. And President Kagame, an astonishing intervention this afternoon, saying he's happy for it to be scrapped and maybe offering to refund the money. Think what we could do with £400 million, Mr. Speaker. It's more than a third of the budget of the National Crime Agency. But the Kigali government have clarified the position this afternoon, and it's even worse. They've said, under the terms of the agreement, Rwanda has no obligation to return any of the funds paid. If no migrants come and the UK government wishes to request a refund of the portion of funding allocated to support, we will consider this request. Unbelievable. The government signed a deal, signed a whole series of cheques to send hundreds of millions of pounds of British taxpayers' money to Rwanda for a scheme they were warned would not work, that they were warned might be unlawful, they were warned would not work as a deterrent, and they were warned would be unenforceable and at high risk of fraud. Yet they signed it. because they don't give a damn about taxpayers' money. And now they want to pass this bill and spend even more taxpayers' money on this failing scheme, a scheme which is only likely to cover less than 1% of the people who arrived in the country last year. Over 90,000 people who applied for asylum. And the Court of Appeal said Rwanda only had capacity for 100 people. The Immigration Minister admitted it's just a few hundred and not any time soon. And if they ever finally implement the Illegal Migration Act, that will immediately create a list of 35,000 people the Home Secretary is supposed to immediately send to Rwanda. And at this rate, it will take the government 100 years to implement their own failing policy. Although, to be honest, it is probably even worse than that, because they can't even find most of the 5,000 people that they put on the initial Rwanda list. Totally unbelievable. The Prime Minister and the Home Secretary, in the space of about 18 months, have literally lost 4,200 people they planned to send to Rwanda. I bet the Prime Minister wishes he could lose a few of those Home Secretaries he managed to send. And he did indeed lose his Immigration Minister. It's part of the chaos of the last few weeks and months. I give way to the former Immigration
for giving way. If she doesn't like the Rwanda policy so much, why did she brief the Times over the Christmas holidays that she was in favour of an offshore processing scheme, a scheme that everyone knows is more expensive than a scheme like Rwanda and has a far less deterrent effect? So it seems to be that everything that she doesn't like is her plan, except she didn't have the guts to put her name to it, so she briefed the Times anonymously.
Yeah. Nice try with total nonsense from the former Immigration Minister, who does have a history of making things up. Let's be clear, it's not clear that there's anything on the planet that is more expensive per person than the government's Rwanda scheme, £400 million, in order to send nobody to Rwanda and to totally fail. But look, the former Immigration Minister, I give him credit, he has exposed the real front bench plan, the real government's plan, the real Prime Minister's plan. It is just to try, in the former Immigration Minister's words, to try and get a few symbolic flights off before a general election with a small number of people on them, not to worry about handing over a small fortune to another country, not to worry about the fact that all this focus on one small failing scheme means they're failing to go after the gangs and they've lost thousands of people the Home Office should be tracking, not to worry about the fact that this new law is so badly drawn up that, frankly, they may be ordered by the courts to bring people back at further huge cost to the British taxpayer, turning the whole thing into an even bigger farce. That is not a workable policy. It is a massive, costly con. They're trying to con voters, trying to con their own party, but actually the fact is everybody can see through it now. He's a £400 million Rwanda scheme for a few hundred people is like the Emperor's new clothes. And the Prime Minister and his Immigration Ministers have been desperately spinning the invisible thread, but we can all see through it. The Home Secretary is just wandering naked round this chamber, waving a little treaty as a fig leaf to hide his modesty behind. I admit he doesn't have much modesty to hide. Mr. Speaker, there are things the Home Secretary and I agree on. We agree on working with France. We agree on the deal with Albania. We agree on the importance of stopping dangerous boat crossings that are undermining border security and putting lives at risk. And I think he probably agrees with us about the failings of the policy he is trying to defend today. We need stronger border security and a properly controlled and managed asylum system, so the UK does its bit to help those fleeing persecution and conflict, and those who have no right to be here are returned. We need Labour's plan for the new security powers, the new cross-border police, the new security agreement, the new returns and enforcement unit, the clearing of the backlog, the ending of hotel use, keeping track of the thousands of people that the Home Secretary has lost. But they'll get their law through tonight. This third new law in 2 years, the third Home Secretary to visit Rwanda with a chequebook, the third bilateral agreement with Rwanda. The Tory backbenchers have been saying it should be 3 strikes and you're out. Yeah. Well, we're now on 3, 6, 9 strikes and they haven't even got to first base. Because every time they bring forward a new law, it makes things worse. The first new law failed because the main provision's now suspended. The second new law failed. The main provision's not even implemented. Forgive us for not believing a word the government says and for voting against a third failing bill today. The only difference now is that none of their backbenchers believe them either. Broken promises on clearing the backlog, on ending hotel use, on stopping the boats, on returning people who come. It's chaos and failing on smuggler gangs, failing on returns and failing to get a grip. Britain deserves better than this Tory asylum chaos.
Sir William Cash.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Very simply, I just simply reply to the Labour Party. We have no intention, certainly I have no intention, if I vote in this division this evening against this bill, to do any single thing to support their propositions as just put by their frontbench spokesman. I'll get that completely clear. They're not doing anything. They have no plan. I want this bill to succeed, and the sole reason why I shall be voting against this bill will be because, on third reading, I don't believe, to use the Home Secretary's own words, that this is the toughest immigration legislation that we could produce, nor do I think we've done whatever it takes. So I can only say that in this context, but it's about the law. I am deeply worried, and this is my main concern, that there will be another claim which comes as a result of this. I don't think anybody expects anything else. And when it does happen, it will go to the Supreme Court. And when it goes to the Supreme Court, the question in front of that Supreme Court is going to be very, very simple. And I put this in my speech yesterday, and I don't retract a single word. And I'm extremely grateful for those people, very senior, and some members of the government, who said to me privately that they agreed with every word I said. And it is simply for this reason that I say this, that actually, if the Act of Parliament is sufficiently comprehensive, using the notwithstanding formula, and at the same time, the words used are clear and unambiguous, then there is no doubt at all that we will win that case in the Supreme Court. Sadly, I just don't think that that's going to happen. I explained yesterday why. There's no need or reason for me to go into it now. I've said what I've said, and all I can say is I wish the government well, but I do have to say that I can't support this in all conscience because I've set out my case and I'm not going to retract it on principle.
Yeah. We come to SNP spokesperson Alison Thewliss.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The front page of this tawdry, pathetic piece of unworkable legislation says, in the name of the Home Secretary, I am unable to make a statement that, in my view, the provisions of the Safety of Rwanda Asylum and Immigration Bill are compatible with the Convention rights, but the Government nevertheless wishes the House to proceed with the bill. It is another illegal bill that will not work, will not fix the problem, and it is a bill for which this Government has no mandate. The 2019 Conservative Manifesto said, we will continue to grant asylum and support to refugees fleeing persecution with the ultimate aim of helping them to return home if it is safe to do so. Nothing about flights to Rwanda, nothing about extradition, nothing about ripping up people's fundamental human rights. Since then, there have been 2 unelected Prime Ministers, there have been 4 Home Secretaries and no mandate for this bill. The UNHCR also say that, and I quote from their assessment of this bill, it maintains the position that the arrangement now articulated in the UK-Rwanda Partnership Treaty and accompanying legislative scheme does not meet the required standards relating to the legality and appropriateness of the transfer of asylum seekers and is not compatible with international refugee law. Rwanda have been clear that they don't want to sign up to an agreement that breaches international law. This bill breaches international law. It is very clear, and it is very dangerous that the government is going down this road. We cannot make a country safe simply by legislating that it is so. It is a fantasy that this government is engaged with. And more dangerous than that, they ask the courts, they ask public servants, and they ask all of us to also engage in that same fantasy. It becomes upside down, topsy-turvy, that the right is wrong and wrong is right, and all of those things make no sense. You cannot make a country safe simply by legislating it so. And we know that it is no deterrent, because the supposedly harsh bills that came before have not been a deterrent either. It's been 181 days since the last tough, harsh, difficult, deterrent piece of legislation was passed. And those measures are not even yet in force from their previous tough, difficult, harsh bill that would be a deterrent. So we cannot believe them now. And you will also find that the tiniest number of people are actually going to be sent to Rwanda anyway. A tiny, less than 1% of the crossings this year would be sent to Rwanda. What happens to the rest of people left in immigration limbo to wander the streets of these islands? They can't say, they don't know, and they have no idea for what they will do when people have no rights and they are out looking for assistance. Mr. Speaker, this bill amounts to nothing more and nothing less than state-sponsored people trafficking. Far from, they don't like to hear it, but it is the truth. They don't like to hear it. And I will explain to them exactly why. Listen to my description and see what they think. Far from dismantling criminal gangs, this government has become the criminal gang, breaking international law, moving vulnerable people across the world without legal process, no right of appeal, no concern for the safety or human rights of asylum seekers, to a country they do not know, involving money and involving profit. It involves people. It involves people that this government will never meet, will never look in the eye, will never sit across the table and watch them in tears because they can't be safe. Robert Burns said, that great humanitarian of Scotland said, man's inhumanity to man make countless thousands mourn. I mourn what this government is doing to human rights, to the undermining of international law and international principles. And I give this assurance, when Scotland gets our independence, we will take our place in the world, we will take our responsibilities seriously, and we will play our full part in the world as an independent nation.
Sir Liam Fox.
Mr. Speaker, can I begin also by adding my tributes to Tony Lloyd, one of the most charming and civilised politicians in this House, a model that would do well to be replicated more widely than it sometimes is. It's very clear from the debates in the last couple of days that it is this side and this side only that understands the concept of deterrence when it comes to the honourable lady has had her hysterical say, I will have mine. When it comes to the importance of dealing with illegal immigration. And it's in stark contrast, I have to say, to the intellectual vacuum that now passes for today's Labour Party. On this side, the debate has been entirely about workability of the bill. And there have been some exceptional speeches, if I may single out my right honourable friend for Newark, in those debates in the past couple of days. Now, I don't believe that we should be demonising at any point those who want to get a better future for themselves by seeking asylum or migration to the United Kingdom, a fine, fair, tolerant society that anyone would want to come to. But the principle of territorial assignment, the right to access the national asylum system upon putting foot on land, has already had a coach and horses driven through it by the fact that many of these are not coming from a dangerous country by boat, they're coming from France. And that cannot be tolerated if we are to have control over our borders. And even more important, a point made very frequently by my right honourable friends, is the need to curb the evil of people smuggling and destroy the economic model of those who traffic in this most disgusting trade. And I have to say, Mr. Speaker, political infringements of the ECHR are nothing to the duty to stop people suffocating in lorries or people drowning coming across the Channel, particularly when France is a country that is perfectly willing to ditch the judgments of the ECHR when it suits them, when it comes to deportation. Our deterrent will be even greater if we pass this legislation and can convince other countries to do the same in a synergistic way. Now, this bill may not be everything that everybody wants, but it is much better than what we have today. If I were only to have voted for legislation that I agreed with 100%, my voting record in the past 32 years may have been different from it is today. And I hear those in my own side saying, actually, we can replace this bill with something else. Well, we can't, Mr. Speaker. As you well know, Erskine May says, and I quote, "When a bill has been rejected or lost through disagreement, it should not, according to the practice of Parliament, be reintroduced in the same session." This is the one chance that we get to pass this legislation. What we do will be judged by our voters according to their priorities. If we leave tonight with nothing, that judgment will be harsh, or worse, leave us to the cringing mediocrities that make up His Majesty's opposition.
Tony Lloyd, who I sat with for his last speech, which was in Westminster Hall, on human rights, on this very issue we're discussing now, and he spoke with such wisdom, and we will all miss him. I also am shocked to hear a member calling another member, female member, hysterical. It's a classic call-out of misogynistic term, and I was shocked to hear it, Mr. Speaker. So this is the third reading of the third bill to try and stop the Channel crossings in 2 years. The first, the Nationalities and Borders Act, has been partially suspended because it was making things worse. The second, the Illegal Migration Act, has mainly not been implemented because the Home Office believes it's unworkable. And so here we are for the third time. This is the fail again and fail harder version. Unaffordable, unworkable, unlawful. It weakens our national borders. It undermines international courts, those courts that protect and that we rely on as British citizens. And I've been very concerned about the attacks on the European Court of Human Rights during debates on this bill. And the costs are spiralling. £400 million, plus £2.1 million already spent in legal bills alone by November 2023. This latest gimmick, not a plan, lets down people fleeing persecution and won't deliver on fixing the immigration system. It will leave nearly 100,000 cases in a backlog, 56,000 people in hotels, and, as we've now heard, more than 4,000 people missing from the system. It won't fix the system that the Conservatives have broken. It won't be that deterrent. It's too small and unworkable. It doesn't respond to the international situation with increasing climate change impact and conflict around the world that is driving people to seek safety. It feels like the Conservative Party can't cope with international reality and have stuck their fingers in their ears and are chanting something about Rwanda instead of facing up to reality. And this lets our country down. What will stop the boats and the dreadful deaths in the cold seas is Labour's plan. We will clear the backlog with a new fast-track system and 1,000 officers. We will end hotel use, saving the taxpayer over £2 billion, and improve enforcement with a new returns and enforcement unit to reverse the collapse in returns for those who have no right to be here. Look, the Conservatives started this by employing some temporary new officers, and it started working. So why not invest in things that work instead of this gimmick? They have started clearing their backlog. The Tories have also started smashing their gangs with work that they are doing in France. Again, it's beginning to work, so why not invest in those things that work, not the Rwanda plan? It's a nonsense to start something but not finish it and leave a half-baked plan in place. What works is smashing the gangs and working with France. We would smash the supply chains with new powers and a new cross-border police unit, which will stop the boats reaching the French coast in the first place. We would work in partnership internationally to address some of the humanitarian crises which are leading people to flee from their homes. We believe in strong border security and a properly controlled and managed and fair asylum system so that the UK will do our bit to help those fleeing persecution and conflict, but return those with no right to be here. And we believe in stopping the gangs, who are the only winners from this bill. Under the Tories, we just have costly chaos. Thank you.
So, Thérèse Coffey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's important to speak in this bill today. I have to say I was somewhat astonished by the speech of the shadow Home Secretary, who can't even get the name of the country right, talking about the Kigali government. We're talking about Rwanda, you know, a respected country that has recently been president of the Commonwealth. In that regard, though, Mr. Speaker, I also want to associate my comments with those respecting the sad loss of Sir Tony Lloyd. I'm conscious that both as Member of Parliament in both Manchester and Rochdale, that he was assiduous for his constituents, assiduous when he was in government, and he will be much missed from this House. The reason I stand today is that I am very keen to make sure that this bill gets through third reading with the largest majority possible, so that we can say to the other House, the elected House has had its say, and we're doing this bill solely because, having had excellent bill taken through by my right honourable friends, the members for Farron and Newark, the Illegal Migration Act, which we should all remember, the Labour Party opposed religiously, blocked everything that we tried to do. But the Supreme Court, after disagreeing with the High Court, pointed to the issue about Rwanda specifically. And I think it's important that Parliament stands up, addresses that specific point, so that we can get through this stage and then commence the relevant sections of the Illegal Migration Act, particularly regarding having a safe third country. Now, I'm very conscious that temperatures are pretty high, but there is a genuine passion on this side of the House to respect the will of our constituents who want to see a fair, legal migration system and not this vague plan, which really isn't a plan by the Labour Party. But I want to say to my right honourable and honourable friends, do support this bill tonight so we have the biggest majority possible. And I point to clause 2 of the bill, where specifically it says in law, and I appreciate what other members have said, but it's very specific that when decision makers are making these decisions, that Parliament has given its full confidence that when people go to Rwanda, that they will be treated fairly, that the conventions will be applied, and then we will have that effective process, but also that effective deterrent, which I think actually the whole House seeks. So, Mr. Speaker, let's be clear, let's talk as one voice. I wish that the opposition would come on this side. I know from their track record of opposing the Illegal Migration Act that actually they might talk the talk, they're full of bluster, they don't really mean it, they don't really care. But I know that this Conservative government cares, I know that every Conservative MP cares, and we need to make sure that the Lords listen to the elected House.
I want to say I'm personally gutted by the loss of Sir Tony Lloyd. He was a decent, kind, wise man and an excellent Member of Parliament, and we will all seriously miss him. As for this debate, they do say that the smaller the stakes, the more ferociously over which they are fought, and the small stakes are that 1% of the asylum seekers who come to this country might just, if this bill works, end up being sent to Rwanda at the cost of £240 million and counting. And we know it won't be a deterrent. We know that people have travelled from the Horn of Africa, as I said earlier on, and through Libya, through over the Mediterranean, through Europe, to that tiny fraction of people who end up trying to cross the English Channel, as if that will put them off, the 1% chance they may go to Rwanda, having taken all the risks they've taken to get as far as France. And of course people travel from France, because, you know, they're not going to blooming sail directly from Libya, are they, for pity's sake? People will come from France. The French government could turn round to the Spanish and to the Italians and say, no, you're a safe country, stay there. You see where I'm going from all this. If we don't work cooperatively, then the whole thing falls down. The real issue is a 165,000 backlog of asylum cases that this incompetent government has failed to clear. The issue of deterrence I've already tried to cover, but one issue that I think will come about is that people may well decide, the people smugglers may well decide to bring people into this country, and they will simply go under the radar, not claiming asylum at all. So you won't reduce the number of people coming here, you will make sure it massively increase the number of people who end up in the black market, being in people trafficking, being victims of sexual slavery and so on. Only a quarter of those few people who are denied asylum, who do go through the system, only a quarter of them are actually removed by this government. So what we've got is a government that talks tough and acts weak. If you actually wanted a deterrent, then you'd make sure that there was a system that actually dealt with those 165,000 people, and you removed the ones who weren't genuine asylum seekers. Even the government's own figures, though, show that 75% of those people who come here claiming asylum are legitimate and genuine refugees. If you want to deter people, assess them, and then return the ones who are not genuine refugees. But the weakest thing of all about this bill is it's predicated upon the government's desire, because they think somehow the electorate likes this, that they would demonise those people who are the most vulnerable in the world. I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that they have misunderstood and massively underestimated the British people, and certainly my constituents, who are better than they think they are. I can tell you about my community. 1945, half of the children who survived the death camps in Nazi-occupied Europe came to our shores. In fact, they came to the shores of Lake Windermere. They were the Windermere boys, the Windermere children, and we are proud of that legacy, because that speaks to the kind of people we are in the lakes and the kind of people we really are in Britain. When you speak to people, and I've visited some of the camps in Europe, when you visit people and you speak to those people who are seeking to come to the United Kingdom, and by the way, there are 19 European Union countries that take more refugees per head than the United Kingdom, which is an important thing to remember. When you talk to those people who do want to come here, what is it that drives them to come here? It's not benefits, it's not the NHS, it is a belief in Britain. They believe Britain is the kind of place where you can raise a family in peace, where you can earn a living, where you can have religious freedom and other liberties. And the thing is, that reputation is built on hundreds of years of experience, a proud experience of what it is to be British. Our forefathers and foremothers have built that reputation. It will take more than this tawdry government and this shabby piece of legislation to undermine that reputation overseas. They want to make Britain unattractive. They will fail. This bill will fail. It is a costly, expensive failure, and it deserves to be rejected by this House.
Mr. Speaker, I'll be quick, but it's been a very useful debate already, because we've heard from the opposition parties where they stand. We've heard from the SNP that they want Scotland to take its place among the nations of the world. What we didn't hear is whether they want to take Scotland to take its fair share of the refugees of the world, because so far they don't do it. And we heard from Labour, which was very good to hear, that they do in fact have a plan to stop the boats. It's our plan. It's everything that we're doing already, just without the Rwanda bit, which is the one essential piece of the jigsaw that will act as an effective deterrent and stop the boats. I honour the honourable gentleman from the Liberal Democrats and his passionate speech there, but I think what he was saying is that we should just be more like Europe when it comes to refugees and asylum. I'm not sure that's what the public want. Mr. Speaker, I just want to pay tribute briefly to a few people. The government whips, first of all, have done a brilliant job today. My congratulations to them, and I honour their efforts. They've been more successful than I have been today, but I'm very glad that we're all more or less united again as a party. Can I pay particular tribute to the Minister who has worked with colleagues across our party and across the House, in fact, to address the concerns that we had. And I'm pleased to say there have been some commitments today and in the last few days. I don't think they go far enough. And I want to just acknowledge the really important work that my honourable friends from Stone and from Newark have done through the committee stage of this bill, because I think that the amendments that they tabled and that so many of us have supported in the last 2 days would have made significant improvements to the operation of this bill. We are all on the same place, as many colleagues have said. We all want to do the same thing on this side of the House, which is to establish an effective deterrent that would ensure that people who are across the channel are immediately detained and removed. I don't think this bill is going to work as it's currently drafted, I'm afraid to say. I think that, in fact, we will see legal challenges that will clog up the process and ensure that the deterrent is not enforced. I regret that we are not honouring the trust that we had made to the people to effectively control our borders, which is what they voted for in 2016 and 2019 so decisively, and what all the opinion polls, all our constituents tell us, all common sense tells us, is such an essential part of our commitment and our responsibilities in government. And I regret that the essential principle of parliamentary sovereignty, while the bill pays tribute quite ostentatiously to the concept, does not in fact ensure that that is going to be the case. We believe that statutes passed in this place have supremacy over judge-made law and certainly over the jurisdiction of the European Court. And I'm afraid to say that the bill as it stands, much as the government agrees with the principle I've just established, the bill as it stands still allows lawyers to use foreign international law commitments and protocols to override the supremacy of Parliament, and I deeply regret this. My view is that we could have got a better bill through Parliament in this session. I think we could have developed it, and I understand it would have been possible to bring forward a bill of a different scope that would have achieved the same ends. So I regret that we're not doing that, but I understand this is where we are. Many of my colleagues, and I honour them for their decision, have decided to vote with the government tonight because they don't want to cause the political disruption which a government defeat would ensue. I respect that greatly. I think that's a very honourable position. My view is, I said at the outset that the bill needed these improvements. I don't think it'll work. I think we could have done better. Nevertheless, the fundamental fact is that we on this side of the House are united in our commitment to stopping the boats through this policy. The real division is not this gangway, it's that aisle. And the great value of the debates that we've been having is that it exposes the position of the parties opposite. They don't believe in stopping the boats, and we all do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The tribute I received about Tony Lloyd today came from the ex-Chief Constable of West Midlands Police, who used to be the Deputy Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police, and he said that Tony was one of the best people he had ever worked with, and so I stand here to say that. I want everybody in here to know that they are about to vote for a bill that they have absolutely no idea how much it's going to cost. Like, we haven't been given that information. I was in for the committee stage of the debate. Earlier, and the chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee said that there was a view that each person that was sent to Rwanda would cost £169,000. And it piqued my anger so greatly because I had just come from an event with the Home Secretary around it being a year on from the independent child sexual abuse inquiry and what progress we have made since then. And I was holding in my hand a piece of paper that said that in 2022, 100,000 children were sexually abused and came forward and said it. And then I looked up how much money the Home Office was allocating for their Sexual Abuse Against Children Fund in 2022, and it was £4.5 million, which I worked out was £42 for every child who'd been raped in that year. And I thought, what political capital of walking round and round and round and round for now the third bill for something that won't work. And 150 judges can be found yesterday under the, the sofa by the Prime Minister when cases in my constituency of rape victims waiting 7 years to get in front of a judge. Frankly, Mr. Speaker, people who think that the amount of time spent on wasting taxpayers' money on something that hasn't worked the last 2 times we tried it and will not work this time, frankly, Mr. Speaker, should be ashamed of themselves for voting for something when they don't have any idea how much it's going to cost the people in their constituencies. I hope they feel shame for the amount of airtime and the amount who turned up today, but not for the victims of child abuse. Excuse me, would you like to intervene? No. The other thing I want to say is that I was in a British court last week, not a foreign court, a British court. I was in a British court with a victim of human trafficking. She'd been trafficked twice. We deported her once already as a trafficking victim, and she was re-trafficked back to this country. And I went to the upper tribunal with her last week. She has 2 children born of the repeated rapes that she suffered as a victim of human trafficking. And the Home Office was trying to deport her again, to which the judge scolded the Home Office lawyers for daring to bring it in front of them. And because I was sat in the courtroom, the Home Office lawyers were not so keen to give their evidence in front of me, so they didn't really give any. Yeah, I wonder why they didn't want to talk about how it was fine for a woman who'd been ritually raped repeatedly and repeatedly to have to go back to the country where that had happened and she had been trafficked to here. I have heard nothing today in any of the debates about when we scoop up all these people without any appeal, what happens to the victims of human trafficking? What happens to them? Because currently I've sat in courtrooms where this government is abusing them. I would never vote for this. Not today, and neither should anybody else.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was first elected to this House on the same day as Tony Lloyd in 1983. He was a brilliant friend, brilliant comrade, voted against the Iraq War, student tuition fees, and against the renewal of Trident, and was a brilliant Shadow Northern Ireland Secretary, and he will be much missed by many good people all over this country. This bill, Mr. Speaker, is an appalling piece of legislation. It fails to take any account of the human suffering of people that are forced, through lack of any other alternative, to try to make a very dangerous crossing across the Channel. I have met people in Calais who are desperate, who are poor, are confused, have travelled from Afghanistan and other places. They are victims of war, of human rights abuse, and of poverty and so much else. The government is now claiming that the only way to deal with this is to attack what they euphemistically call as a foreign court, when in reality that court is the European Court of Human Rights, which is part of our judicial system, and that they are trying to offshore their obligations under international law and international treaties. Look at it on a global stage. It is the wealthy countries of the world, such as Australia and Britain, that want to offshore issues surrounding asylum and the rights of people to seek asylum and pretend that somehow or other they're doing the world a favour. We have to work with other countries to deal with the issue of the desperation of so many refugees in Europe, far more in other parts of the world. This bill blames those people for being victims, plays into the narrative of the most backward, horrible remarks made in our national media and national newspapers about asylum seekers, without ever recognising that those people that have sought legally to seek asylum in this country, it's always legal to seek asylum, that's there in treaty. Tomorrow, eventually, there'll be our doctors, there'll be our lawyers, there'll be our teachers, there'll be our engineers, as they are all over Europe. But it's playing into this sort of racist trope against refugees all over the world, and it is attacking refugees because of where they come from. And so I hope that the House tonight rejects this bill, but I hope in future we don't come back to this kind of debate. Instead, we start to look at the issues of human rights abuse, victims of war, victims of environmental disaster, and the needs of those people to be cared for on this planet as fellow human beings, rather than making them out to be the enemies they certainly are not. Desperate people are looking for a place of safety. Surely it's our obligation. The Home Secretary is getting very excited, but it's his obligation to try and make sure they do have a place of safety in which to survive for the rest of their lives.
Well, Bryant, Mr. Speaker, I too pay tribute to Tony Lloyd. He was a far, far better man than most of us in this House, I think we would all admit. And those of us who have survived thus far advanced cancer often feel a particular poignancy. I know the Home Secretary will agree with this point, when someone is lost, a friend is lost to cancer. So my condolences go to his family, and I hope we will have a proper time to commemorate him, as you've said, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want the boats to stop, not because I don't value the lives of those who've paid thousands of pounds to risk their lives on the high seas in unseaworthy vessels, but because I do value their lives, because I despise the people traffickers, and because I don't want the generosity of the British people to be tested to breaking point. I'm voting against at third reading today for 4 reasons, though. First, I agree with the right honourable members, they're not all here now, I'm afraid, but for Newark, for Stone and for Devizes, this bill won't work. It's a false promise, and I'm sick of false promises. It's a waste of money, and I'm sick of the government wasting our money. And I'm very sceptical that it will actually act as a deterrent. After all, if the freezing waters of the Channel that can take a life in a matter of minutes are not a deterrent, how will a 1% chance of being transported to Rwanda act as a deterrent?
Exactly.
Second, this bill is based on a heady mixture of gross exaggeration, preposterous wishful thinking, and miserably misconceived machismo. Look at the exaggerations. The Right Honourable Member for Newark said yesterday, millions of people in the world want to make that journey in a small boat. Where on earth is his evidence for that? The Right Honourable Member for Farron said that there are many instances of asylum seekers purporting to be homosexual to receive preferential treatment in asylum applications. Where on earth is her evidence for that? Many have claimed that the vast majority of those arriving in small boats are economic migrants. But the evidence is that when the Home Office has investigated, it has granted 65% of them refugee status. Third, the Right Honourable Member for Newark said yesterday that the law is our servant, not our master. But it is wrong that even without amendment, this bill places ministers above the law. It means, Mr. Speaker, that even if a dog is factually a dog, and a court, having interpreted the law, has adjudged it to be a dog, the government can declare it nonetheless to be a cat. The former Attorney General said earlier, quite rightly, that we rely in the UK on international law. It's the basis of how we protect ourselves and our interests. So how can we argue that China and Russia and the Houthis should not renege on international human rights law when we ditch it when it's inconvenient for us? And how many of us condemned Russia, quite rightly, when it declared by statute law that Luhansk and Donetsk were part of Russia when they are patently part of Ukraine, as laid down in international treaty? Fourthly and finally, Mr. Speaker, the Right Honourable Member for Newark said yesterday, we are not a parish council. I agree. So let's stop behaving like Handforth Parish Council. Let's behave like the House of Commons. Protect ancient liberties, including the right to appeal, respect the rule of law and honour our international commitments, like honourable members.
Okay, well, the committee's gone through the House and it's not made any amendments, any of the varying and contradictory amendments from the varying and contradictory factions on the Tory parties. And what we're left with is a bill that in reality nobody actually wants. The hardliners on the Tory party right don't like it, something to do with foreign courts. The Tory left don't particularly like it because they realise how close it sails to breaching our international human rights obligations. The official opposition don't like it, I think, because it's too expensive. And on the SNP, we are opposed to this bill and the entire hostile environment policy in principle, because this is just completely the wrong way to deal with some of the poorest and most vulnerable people who come to these shores seeking refuge and safety. We want to welcome refugees and encourage them to contribute to our economy and society. But, Mr. Speaker, it seems even the Republic of Rwanda is getting cold feet, and no wonder, notwithstanding the fact that the United Kingdom continues to grant asylum to asylum seekers from Rwanda. Why should a country that aspires to be a prosperous, stable African democracy allow itself to become a political football for wannabe leaders of the opposition who currently inhabit the Tory benches? According to the Prime Minister today, the best, or perhaps the worst thing about Rwanda is that it is not the UK. And the very fact of not being the UK is a deterrent for people to come here because they might be deported to it. So by the same logic, if the government threatened to deport people to Disneyland, that would also be a deterrent because Disneyland is not in the UK. Now, of course, Disneyland is a place where dreams are supposed to come true. But I think the former Home Secretary and indeed the former Immigration Minister's dreams of flights taking off to Rwanda are not going to come true. And neither are their dreams of becoming the next leader of the opposition after the election. But the dream on these benches of an independent Scotland, the dream which will never die, of an independent Scotland that has its own independent, humane asylum system which recognises human rights and wants to welcome refugees, that dream will come true, and sooner rather than later, Mr. Speaker.
The question is that the bill now be read a third time. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. Division, clear the lobbies. The question is that the bill now be read a third time. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye!
The contrary, no.
No.
The tellers for the ayes are Mark Fletcher and Scott Mann. For the noes are Sam Dixon and Andrew Weston. Lock the doors!
Order.
The ayes to the right, 320. The noes to the left, 276.
The ayes to the right, 320. The noes to the left, 276. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. Look! I'll just let the chamber clear and then we'll...
Thank you, that's a good idea.
Nobody's objecting.
Right. I think that's it.
I'm going to put motions 3, 4 and 5. Minister to move.
I beg to move.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.